family name is legendary in the world of the paranormal.
It was a case I worked on with them. My grandfather almost died.
I think there are stories that will never be told.
Families would be devastated if we released that information. Don't touch that, it's cursed. It would not be where they left it when they came home from work at night. Can I say for sure that Dan Rivera was killed by Annabelle? Absolutely not.
People say certain cases your grandparents worked on were too terrifying for the public to ever know about.
I didn't want him exposing our cases to the public.
Do you have any thoughts on comedian Matt Rife recently purchasing the Annabelle doll?
I'd never even heard of the man.
Welcome to Real Appreciation, the show where we explore the artists behind the arts and the gratitude that powers them. I am one half of your host, David Clair-Bennett.
And I'm Maria Elizabeth Darnell.
And today, we have the pleasure of sitting with someone whose family name is legendary in the world of the paranormal. He is the grandson of Ed and Lorraine Warren, the real-life investigators whose case is inspiring the infamous Conjuring Universe, and he's dedicated his life to carrying on their extraordinary legacy.
And not to mention, he's also the director of the Warren Legacy Foundation for Paranormal Research, helping families all over the world who are facing things most of us couldn't even imagine.
So please, without further ado, welcome to the show, the one, the only, Chris McKinnell.
Thank you very much. That's quite an energetic and kind introduction.
So Chris, you grew up hearing stories about Ed and Lorraine Warren that most people only know from the Conjuring movies. What's the one story that still gives you chills whenever you think about it?
Wow, that's I wish I had some warning on that. That's hard. Honestly, everything that I saw with them was extraordinary. I mean, not always evil, not always, dangerous, but the first thing that comes to mind was a case I worked on with them, and that would be because my grandfather almost died. We were working on the possession of a man named Maurice Theriault, better known as Frenchie in the Nun movies. By the way, those movies are absolute fantasies. There's nothing at all real about them, and you shouldn't start thinking that there's some nun monster running around. But during the exorcism, I was protecting the bishop who was doing the exorcism. My grandfather was 10 feet away from me with my grandmother, complaining he didn't feel well. And my grandmother looked at him and said, "Ed, why don't you have a banana? You're probably low on potassium." He was having a heart attack during the exorcism. And she couldn't see it. That's why I don't trust psychics. I'm a psychic. I don't trust anybody without evidence. My grandmother taught me the best psychic in the world is only right 60% of the time. That's a terrible average to bet your life on. I mean, don't get me wrong. If somebody that you don't know can come up to you and start telling you things that they couldn't possibly know, of course that's interesting. That's fascinating. But that doesn't mean you should direct your life toward whatever they tell you to direct it toward. Look for evidence.
So something I've always wanted to go ahead and ask when it comes to movies like The Conjuring, for example, is if the Conjuring movies are if they even come close to the truth. We know we just talked about the Nun not really coming close at all, or if they're just completely way off.
The first one, I'm told, was fairly accurate, although my grandfather never performed an exorcism. The second one, to me, was ridiculous. I know many people love that one, but Amityville, my grandparents were in there for a day. They were invited by Channel 5 News. And they were in the Enfield haunting at the most 10 days. That was a man named Maurice Grossman's case. No relation to my grandparents whatsoever. And there was none. There were no connections to that case between those two cases. The third movie was based actually on a Ouija board, not on some satanic witch. Now, the one that's coming out is based on a case I worked on with my grandparents back in '86. I was in my last year of college, and I know for a fact this movie is absolute fantasy. I'm not even going to see it. They've got others. They're trying to build up a new TV series spinoff, and it has no relation to reality. My mom has never had anything to do with the paranormal. Her husband has never had anything to do with it other than lecturing. But they want to, it's Hollywood. They want to keep making money.
I imagine carrying the Warren name comes with so much weight. How do you balance honoring your grandparents' legacy while also telling your own story?
That's a difficult line to walk. I love my grandparents. I respect my grandparents. They were wonderful mentors. But I learned a lot, both to do and not to do. Well, I guess I feel very uncomfortable with being respected because I have grandparents. Yes, I worked with my grandparents. Yes, I learned from them. That has a lot to do with me. But the fact that my grandparents shouldn't put me up above anybody at all, that's just silly to me. My grandparents taught me to adjust your thinking, that this is a field of study. They didn't even believe in demons the first 6 years they were doing this work. And then, because they're Catholic, that when they saw things they couldn't explain as being ghosts, that's what they fell back on, that idea. I, on the other hand, I'm more academic, and I've traveled all over the world. I'm more relying on cultural anthropology and psychology and quantum physics to try to understand these things. I believe in God, don't get me wrong. I just think whatever God is, it's too large a concept for my tiny little brain. And I'm somebody who has seen this phenomena, witnessed it, been attacked by it. I know it exists. I just don't believe in the superstitions that we've built up around it to explain it all. We are so desperate to not face the unknown that we will create stories and folklore to explain it. And I'm not willing to do that.
I want to go ahead and take us outside of the paranormal world here for a little bit and get a little bit more personal with you, Chris. And can you tell us, please, more about your inspiring story? I know that you've overcome so much in your life. Can you go ahead and share with Maria and I and the rest of the audience watching on Real Appreciation a moment that was the hardest to get through and what kept you moving forward?
Yeah, it's been a hard life. I was in a wheelchair for 10 years and on oxygen. I was so heavy, I couldn't walk. I couldn't care for myself. My body was breaking down and splitting open. They expected me to die. I was under nurses' care 65 hours a week. And I learned an important lesson from hitting rock bottom like that we have the power within us to change our lives. We can write a new chapter. We can move on. And every one of us has that ability. I don't care. Two of my greatest heroes are Christopher Reeve and Michael J. Fox, two men who took their disability and turned it into a power engine to help others. So yes, there's still, Christopher Reeve's no longer with us, of course, but they used that for the betterment of others. That's our strength. And that's where I draw my power from, is knowing that each and every one of us can be the hero of their own story. In the eyes of, I've said this before, but in the eyes of God, we're kind of like a field of fireflies. None of us is any brighter than the other. And we are all of value. We're all beautiful in God's eyes. I don't want to ever be anything more or less than that.
So kind of switching gears here, just switching back topics for just a moment. Some people say certain cases your grandparents worked on were too terrifying for the public to ever know about. Do you think there are stories that will never be told?
Sure. My grandparents worked on about 10,000 cases in their life. I've worked on about 10,500. There's no way we can share it all. They didn't even remember most of their cases. I don't remember most of mine. There are cases out there that the families would be devastated if we released that information. Sadly, that's one of the things I learned from my grandparents. It was one of the things my grandfather and I used to argue about all the time. I didn't want him exposing our cases to the public. And he had learned in the early 70s, I think, it was with the Lindley Street case in Bridgeport, Connecticut. It was a poltergeist case back in 72 or 73. He had learned that by coming forward, you could not only pressure the church into helping, but you can let the general public know that you're there to help. Now, we have the internet. I don't need to do that. I am here with you guys so I can let people know that we're here to help. Now, but I've seen the damage that can do. I would never do that.
Let's talk about Annabelle for a second here. The doll has become a horror icon, but what is the truth about Annabelle that people almost never hear?
It's not a demon. I don't believe it's a demon. I don't believe in demons. Look, I'm an exorcist only because I had to become one. It was an emergency situation, but I've been involved in about 12 in 44 years of work. That shows how rare these things are. But I don't believe in demons. I believe in thought forms or egregores or tulpas. These are manifestations of spirit through our own energy. They are real. I am not saying they're figments of our imagination in any sense that you might be aware of. They are figments of our imagination in that they break away from us, take on a life of their own, and become maybe poltergeist phenomena or some form of a cryptid. We give them shape with our belief. And in this case, Annabelle was a doll owned by 2 nursing students, one of whom her name was Debbie, and it was a gift from her mother. They loved this thing for some weird reason, and they poured all their love into it until one day its arms came up on the tabletop where they were sitting with it. And they, it was like 1969, 1970, and they're like, oh, look, there must be a spirit in the doll. Let's have a seance. And they got a hold of a medium who came up with this ridiculous story that it's a little girl named Annabelle Higgins who is just looking for someone to love her. Once you give a backstory to the belief, you've empowered it even more. And then it started acting like a little girl. It would leave notes on parchment paper with crayon, neither of which were in the house, saying things like, want to play? Miss me? It would not be where they left it when they came home from work at night. It would be in a different location, like it was playing hide and seek, like something was watching them all the time. They were scared now, and the energy they started to feed it was negative. The boyfriend, Debbie's boyfriend, did not like this doll. He thought it was, nothing good. Let's just throw it away. And he was sleeping on the couch one afternoon, and he woke up and he said, I just had a dream that Annabelle had crawled up on me and was choking me to death. He walked over to where it was, picked it up, threw it across the room and said, you're just a stupid doll. You couldn't hurt anyone. Now, the way I would interpret what happened next, the doll threw a tantrum just like a little girl would. There was banging the walls. The chair the doll had been sitting in rocketed across the room. This was before my grandparents were well known. They'd been doing this like 23 years and nobody knew who they were. And my grandparents and Father Treble agreed to go check it out that day. They saw it. My grandmother felt the negative energy. My grandfather used his own preconceived notions, saying no child would be allowed by God to inhabit a doll. And they decided it had to be demonic. So they brought it home and they put it in a chair. They didn't know how to bind it. They didn't know how to protect people from it. Matter of fact, my cousin just told me a story that at Christmas Eve, all the kids came and they saw the doll and they wanted to play with it. And my grandfather was like, don't touch that, it's cursed.
Well, as the grandson of Ed and Lorraine Warren, do you have any thoughts on comedian Matt Rife recently purchasing the Annabelle doll?
I'd never even heard of the man until he bought it. I didn't know who he was. I was far more concerned with what my mother's husband was doing by allowing things out on tour. You have to understand, Tony Spera, he's an entertainer. He's never worked on any cases in his entire life. You can ask what case he's ever worked on. He has none. He talks about my cases, and it's ironic. He's actually, a character playing him is going to be in the next movie playing a part that I would assume is similar to what I had to do on that case. And I was willing to allow him to do that and just live his moment, for my mother's sake. But then he started wanting to bring this thing on tour. And that to me was so dangerous and a betrayal of everything my grandparents spent their lives doing. One of the worst parts of my grandparents' legacy is that my grandfather ever made the mistake of calling it a museum. It was never open to the public. That's a misconception. It was always by special invitation, one or two people, very small groups, with specific instructions. Don't touch anything. Don't treat anything with misrespect. Do not try to communicate with anything. And yet, what are they doing now? They're doing TikTok videos where they're talking to these things and trying to communicate with these things. To me, that place is the Chernobyl of the paranormal. And it bothers me to no end what can happen. We've seen what recently happened. Can I say for sure that Dan Rivera was killed by Annabelle? Absolutely not. But I've been levitated over the stairs in the Smurl house. I was picked up and thrown across the room with my cousin in a bed in another poltergeist case. I've had the gas turn on my stove 3 nights in a row without the flame because I was about to go on a case. Another time I broke a generational curse. I don't like magic. I don't like the idea of magic. To me, it's directed energy, quantum physics at work. But I did just finished breaking this curse in Philadelphia, and as we're getting on the highway, the brakes go out on the car, and we slam into another vehicle. Another time, I was sending one of my researchers out on a really bad case, and the night before he was to go, he had a massive stroke. He was 40 years old. So the paranormal can be deadly. It can be very empowering. It can be very, very beautiful. But it's like electricity. It can light up the world or it can kill you.
With everything you've seen and experienced, the real-life terror and the pressure of your family legacy, how do you protect your mental health when your work literally exposes you to the darkest parts of the world?
I'm the happiest person you will ever meet. I really am. My life is a joy. I was almost dead. I lost everything in my life 3 times. I took in homeless people who beat me, robbed me, and caused me to be evicted, losing all of my possessions because I had no way to put them into storage. And if you've hit that bottom, you realize what's really important in life. I was also lived for 2 years in the Peace Corps in a country called Mali in West Africa. It was the poorest country in the world under a military dictator. It taught me what was important. People are important, helping one another, lifting one another up. I get joy out of that. So does it hurt when I can't help? Yeah, of course. You can only do so much. You can't help somebody who's not willing to see the real problem. A lot of people come to us, they're terrified, they're panicked. And I'm not saying that mental illness precludes the paranormal. That's not the case. It actually makes it more likely. But sometimes it's only that, or sometimes it's only another natural explanation, like bad luck. You're sick, you're poor. That's not black magic. That's unfortunately our system. And when you can't get that through to people and help them in a different way, that's heartbreaking. But I can let it go because at the end of the day, that's their choice. I have to respect their free will. I know, just as my grandparents, I believe in reincarnation. What we do here today doesn't mean that you're lost forever. It's just you'll get another opportunity.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. And lastly, here on Real Appreciation, before we wrap things up, Maria and I are so big on gratitude and, of course, pun intended, appreciation, and how big of a part it plays in our everyday lives.
When we wake up and before we go to bed, we say 3 things that we're grateful for.
So with that being said, Chris, what are the 3 things in your life you are grateful for right now?
Every day. My daughter. The opportunity to serve.
Amazing. Well, this has truly been an honor for us to sit with you today, Chris. We appreciate your time so very much.
Indeed we do, Maria. And Chris, you are doing amazing stuff. But outside of the paranormal stuff, I want to take this time to say you are doing even more amazing stuff just by being present, just by being here, just by sharing your story. And I guarantee you are inspiring somebody listening to or watching this episode with your personal story. So I want to personally thank you for not only agreeing to be here today on the show, but for being here each and every single day.
I appreciate it. If I could just,
Yeah.
if anybody does need help, our services are free. They're confidential. All you have to do is reach out to me. I'm available pretty much everywhere, and I'm very reachable. And you can go to warrenlegacyfoundation.com. I have amazing people. My teammates are the best, and they volunteer their services all over the world to help you. So if you need us, we're there for you.
That's warrenlegacyfoundation.com, warrenlegacyfoundation.com. We're going to list it in the socials listed below in the description. So thank you so much for your time, Chris. And thank you to everyone who's been supporting Real Appreciation. We've been growing so much, over 40 million impressions and growing. We are so grateful. And make sure you subscribe, because every Tuesday and Thursday we get exclusive episodes just like this one. So let people know that there's a show like ours. We'll be back very soon with a brand new episode. I am David Clair-Bennett.
And I'm Maria Elizabeth Darnell.
And he is the wonderful and the amazing and the gifted Chris McKinnell. And we are